Hi, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, even. We've had our technical difficulties, why wouldn't we, despite our best laid plans. But you're here this morning with me, Deirdre McPartlin. I am manager of the UK office of Enterprise Ireland, based in London, and Ian Robinson.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ian. I'm a partner with Fragomen, the immigration law firm.
So I'll introduce you properly to Ian in a second, but just to give us the context, this is part of our series of Brexit-related webinars. So Enterprise Ireland has organised webinars on customs, on sourcing, on managing currency risk. There's a webinar tomorrow on managing working capital. But today, we're focusing on movement of people and the changes that will come about for UK citizens living in the EU and EU citizens living in Europe. And of course, the things that business needs to do to plan for that. So the webinar will take about 40 to 45 minutes. We'll wrap up a little bit earlier than that in terms of the slide presentations and take questions for about 10 minutes. There is an instant messaging feature which you can avail of. I'm just looking, that looks like it's having a slight bit of technical issue on our side. So if that's the case, email your questions to christopher.barry@enterprise-ireland.com. Okay, we're all right. Angela Byrne is asking, is this the IM? It is. So we're coming closer to the microphone. And what we'll do is we'll make the recording available to everybody about in a day or so, certainly by the end of the week, and the slides should be up pretty much by the end of the day. And Ian has been generous enough to say he'll share the slides with us. So let me just give you a bit of background to Ian. Really delighted to welcome you. As you said, you're a partner in Fragomen in the London office, and you're very generous in giving us your time today. Fragomen, for those who aren't familiar with it, is an international law firm with offices also in London and in Ireland. And looking at your bio, you manage a large team across a number of sectors. You also cover, and you're responsible for Fragomen's UK government strategies practice.
Yep, that's right.
That sounds important. So that brings you in contact with decision makers in and around government all the time. And prior to joining Fragomen, I understand that you were 8 years in the Home Office.
Yeah, that's right.
And you managed, I know all about your life, and you managed the UK's economic migration policy, I believe, at that time.
Yeah,
so for everybody who's listening, what makes Ian so interesting for us is this mixture of understanding the UK government and understanding its approach to policy making and its current policies, as well as how business reacts to that.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that a good enough introduction, Ian?
Yeah, that was really good. That was really good.
So maybe before we move on, one very quick question, just to kick us off, is we're talking about movement of people. Can you just explain what we mean by that, Ian?
Yeah, so for the purposes of today, with movement of people, we're talking essentially about European people moving to the UK, moving their life here to live and work in the UK, and likewise British people moving into Europe, and again moving their lives into Europe for the purpose of work. We aren't for these purposes talking about people who are heading over for a week on holiday or a few days on business. These are life-changing moves. Nor are we limiting it to people who are going to move after Brexit. Really importantly, everything that we're going to talk about today will equally apply to people who have been living in the UK or in Europe for quite some time and need to confirm their residence. So we'll cover all of that together.
Okay. And, well, why don't you kick off?
Yeah,
so
great.
These are the up and downs buttons if you want to move through your presentation, or even here.
So, thank you. So, firstly, hopefully I look better on the screen than I do in my photo. What I want to do today is talk to you about Brexit and what it means for the movement of people and the people who could be caught by it in the UK and Europe. I'm going to be setting out the law, the processes that people need to follow, but I also want to tie this to what it means for your business. It's such an unsettling time. It's so uncertain. It seems like the closer we get to Brexit, the less we know about what will happen. But despite the uncertainty, it is possible to plan for it, and it is possible to be ready for Brexit as it relates to the people that you employ now and the people that you could employ in the future. So just to set the scene, I'll start with the possible outcomes. So Theresa May has put her deal before Parliament. Parliament so far has refused to approve the deal. They've actually voted against it twice, once in record numbers. Where it goes from here is complicated. There will be a series of votes in the Commons tomorrow where Parliament will express its will and say whether or not there is a majority for any particular outcome. It could be, it seems quite unlikely that they approve the Prime Minister's deal. If they were to do that, then the policies within this slide pack will apply. It may be that they revise the deal put forward by the Prime Minister. Actually, though, even with a revised deal, it's very unlikely that anything will change for people. The systems that have been built up, the rights that have been agreed for citizens are unlikely to change. So this won't go out of date tomorrow. It could be that Brexit is delayed, in which case the uncertainty looms for that little bit longer, or it could be that we have a no-deal Brexit. Again, though, even if we have a no-deal Brexit, the policies that are in this presentation will broadly still apply. There will be some exceptions, but I'll set out what they are as we go through. At the extreme, it may be that Parliament votes for a second referendum or even no Brexit. One way or another, if Brexit happens, people who are moving from the UK to Europe, people who are already in the UK, and then British people going in the opposite direction will need provisions for their rights, for their right to live and work in those countries. We would not expect huge deviations on what we're talking about today. So here we have our risk register. I'm going to go through the policy as we go on, but it's always good to put this into context. Essentially, where should you worry? I'm using the word risk here, but really, given that the likelihood of any particular scenario is unknown, we're thinking about impact here. Now, the UK is fairly contained. So although Brexit is very uncertain in the UK in terms of what it will do to our wider regulatory environment and our trade environment, on immigration it's fairly clear. If there is a deal, essentially European people living in the UK before the end of December 2020 will be able to apply for a permission that will lead to permanent residence, and if they wish for it to British citizenship as well. There is a degree of compliance exposure here, but really the risk is that your employees and your prospective employees don't understand their rights. And if they don't understand their rights, the risk will be that it's harder to keep them, it's harder to bring them in. But there are ways to get around that. There are ways to speak to them and give them useful, reassuring information. If there is no deal, then any European living in the UK before Brexit, and Brexit could be on the 12th of April, it could be in late May, it could be later, wherever it is, irrespective of that, the deal at the moment, the agreement, at the moment is that even if there is no deal, they'll be able to stay. They'll need to make an application, but the application will be reasonably straightforward. Then you'll have people coming in after Brexit, and before the end of December 2020, and I'll come to it later to why that's an important date, they will be stamped into the UK for 3 months where they're coming from Europe, not from Ireland. Irish people are different, and I'll explain why. But they'll be stamped in for 3 months, and then they'll be able to stay for 3 years, and may be able to extend their stay. We don't know whether or not they'll be able to. The government hasn't said yet, but we can assume that people in higher skilled jobs will be able to stay. Europe is much more complicated. So you'll have a similar arrangement if there is a deal, and across the 27 EU member states, the 3 EEA member states, and Switzerland, people, if there is a deal, will be able to stay, and where they have 5 years residence will be able to claim permanent residence straight away. Where they have less than 5 years, they will be able to get a bridging permission to get them to 5 years and permanent residence. Essentially, the policy is more or less the same, but there will be 31 different processes across those European countries. So this creates a logistical challenge for you. one that needs to be very carefully managed. The first important point on this is you need to know who those people are so that you can reassure them and direct them to do the right thing. If there is no deal, it will be much harder. If there is no deal, then people living in Europe before Brexit, again, UK citizens living in Europe before Brexit will be able to stay permanently. But they will need to make an application. In some countries, they'll have a year and a half, 21 months. In Germany, though, they will only have 3 months. In France, they may have 3 months, they may have a year. The same logistical challenge applies. You will need to make sure that they all understand what needs to happen and to make an application, and I'll cover this in more detail later on. But it will be much more important that you work quickly and you make sure that they understand that if they're in Germany, they have 3 months. If they're in Belgium, they have 21 months. If they're in Sweden, they have 12 months. You'll need to go through country by country and make sure nobody fails to make the application.
And just to be stated blinding obvious, but the reason we're explaining this as well is because obviously some Irish companies will have UK citizens working in their teams who need to travel in and around Europe.
Yeah, that's right. And this will equally apply not just to the UK citizens, but to their non-EU family members, just as it will apply not just to European citizens in the UK, but also their non-European family members too. So I've said that Ireland is different. The UK's relationship with Ireland predates our relationship with the European Union, and as a consequence, Irish people are considered to be settled when they enter the UK. In law, they're considered settled where they enter through the common travel area, so typically from Ireland, but actually in practice, the government treats them as settled where they enter through, however they enter. And laws will be changed to make sure that that applies legally across the board wherever an Irish person comes in from. So Irish people will not need to make the applications that I'm talking about for the UK. But if you're Irish and you've got a non-European partner, so an American or Australian or an Indian, they will need to make an application. And in practice, it will be far easier for them if you as an Irish person apply for settled status. You then have a reference number, they can refer to you, and the Home Office have already done their checks on you quite quickly, and it will be much easier for them to complete the checks and grant to your non-European partner. So the detail for Europeans in the UK. The UK, as it stands, is going to leave the European Union. That could be this month, next month, or in May. There could be further delays, but actually, again, the actions that you need to take will not differ a great deal whenever Brexit is. Essentially, you need to make sure that you have everything in order, that people know what they're doing and that they do it. If there is a deal, a Brexit transition period will run until the end of December 2020. Now, during that time, nothing will change. Free movement will continue and you won't notice any difference to people as they enter the UK. If there is no deal, free movement will end shortly after Brexit. Not quite clear exactly how soon after Brexit, but it's at that point that people will be stamped in for 3 months and limited to 3 months stay unless they can get a new visa. And I'll go into the detail on that later. But people who come in before the end of that transition period, if there is a deal, or people who are here before Brexit, if there is no deal, will need to make an application. The applications, and I'm going to talk about the process for these applications, they're typically online, they're straightforward, they're free, and it should not be, nobody should be put off from making the applications. Your employees certainly shouldn't. Where they've lived in the UK for 5 years, they will get what's called settled status. And settled status will be for people, will mean that people can stay here permanently, and a year after having been granted settled status, if they want to, they can become British. They'll need to make sure that they can have dual nationality, so German nationals probably won't be able to, for instance, but they can become British if they want to. They won't need to submit their passport, they won't need to fill in an 85-page paper form as they used to have to. This will be done via an app and online. And really importantly, the Home Office want to grant these applications. They, last time I spoke to them, they'd issued 150,000 grants. They'd refused a handful of people, but the people they had refused were pretending to be European where they were not. Europeans are not being refused. You would only be refused if you were a serious criminal, and there we're talking about extended periods of time in prison, serious criminality. So the timeline is that the Brexit, at the moment the default is that we leave on the 29th of March, but that could be extended. We will have the transition period until the end of December, and if there is a deal, people will then, end of December 2020, if there is a deal, people will have until the end of June 2021 to make their application, although that deadline will come forward to the end of December 2020 if there is no deal. The big question is, what if I don't apply? It seems unlikely that the Home Office will expect a European person to leave the UK or that they would enforce removal, but people will find it more difficult to live here. They'll find it far more difficult to rent a flat, to get a new job, to get a driving licence. They could find it more difficult to access social services or even the health service. It's really important that people make the applications. If they don't, and they're already working for you, it's unlikely that you will be subject to civil penalties for illegal working. This is not necessarily an issue of compliance for you for your existing employees, but it will be an issue of compliance for you where you're seeking to recruit someone from the 1st of January 2021 onwards, and it will certainly be an issue of compliance for them when they're struggling to move house or get a new job. In terms of how will it work, so here we have Eric and Jean, our French couple, who are going to be applying for status. So typically what we're talking about for your employees is that they will download an app, and the app is readily available, but right now only on Android phones. It's not available on Apple phones. There are no published plans to extend the app to Apple phones, but I understand that the Home Office are keen for that to happen. The reason that it's not available on Apple is that the technology used for Apple Pay would be needed, and it's not being opened up to anybody else. So some of your employees won't own an Android phone. Hopefully they can borrow one from a friend. If not, they will be able to make applications online, but need to post their passports in. Not ideal, but it is an option for them. Or for some of my clients, they are buying Android devices. We bought a handful of Android devices so we can go and sit in rooms at our client sites and actually help them make the application. So you download the app, you then hold it over your passport, it uploads your biographical details, you hold it in front of your face, and in a very 1970s sci-fi way, it scans your face. There are flashing lights, so please remember that if anybody is sensitive to them, and then you take a selfie. That then confirms that you are indeed the person in your passport, and it moves you to an online application system in your browser. You insert your national insurance number, you answer a bunch of questions, it then checks your details against HMRC records, and from that it knows that you've been living in the UK for 5 years, or that you haven't, and it says, great, we think you're eligible for settled status or pre-settled status. If you get settled status, that's permanent residence. If it's pre-settled, that's the probationary visa that allows you to stay for 5 years. If it makes a mistake and thinks you've been here for 3 years when you've been here for longer, you can photograph documents like annual bank statements or tenancy agreements or employer letters to confirm your residence and submit them. Right now, you then need to make a payment of £65, which will be refunded. That requirement will go fairly shortly. The Home Office announced a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister announced that the applications would be free. The Home Office weren't quite ready for that announcement, so they haven't changed the technology yet. Having paid, the application goes to the Home Office, they check that you aren't a criminal, and if you aren't, and I'm sure your employees wouldn't be, you get an email back, sometimes a few hours, sometimes a few days later. They're saying 2 to 3 weeks, but it's much quicker at the moment, and that confirms your status. You then have an online record of your status. Really importantly, you will not have a card or a document. This is what you'll have. Your proof will be an online record, and in future, when as an employee you're checking the person's right to work, you would log on to the new online right to work platform.
Just a second, I just want to close this down to make the screen bigger.
Okay.
We'll take questions at the end, okay? But keep firing them in.
So One question was asked was, how does the 5 years residence work, and is that continuous? Which brings me perfectly to the next slide. So 5 years residence should be simple, but these things never are. What the Home Office is saying is that if you want to qualify with continuous residence, you must not have been out of the UK for more than 6 months in any 12-month period, calendar period, counting back from the date of your application. They don't reasonably expect you to tell them about every single absence from the UK, but they do expect best efforts, and they don't expect people to mislead them. So if you know that you've been out for a long period, but you still have a HMRC record suggesting that you've been in the UK, you should be honest about that. Typically, it's no more than 6 months in 12, but a single absence of up to less than 12 months is permitted for a good reason. So childbirth, an overseas posting, maternity or sickness. Once you have settled status, you can keep settled status so long as you are not out of the UK for more than 5 consecutive years. Really importantly, if I held settled status and I was told I needed to go and work in Australia for an extended period, so long as I came back within the 5-year window, the clock would start again for a new 5 years. As an employer, you need to be thinking about this and making sure that you aren't about to send someone away who has been living in the UK for 4 years, and you're sending them away for 15 months at the risk of breaking their continuous residence. Likewise, if you've had people who have lived here for years and they're European and they're leaving the UK on a long-term assignment, make sure that they know that they will be eligible for settled status, but not if they're out for over 5 years and they don't come back.
I think that answers a question that popped up there, wasn't it, about postings?
Yeah.
Thanks, Betty.
Then we come to UK nationals in Europe. Now, this is a more important and more complicated issue for you because it's more difficult if there's no deal, but also because you've got 31 different countries to think about. So if a deal is agreed, we will leave the EU on the midnight on the 30th of March, or I suppose that would be midnight, but midnight on the 30th of March. That will be 11 o'clock on the 29th of March for the UK because of the time difference. There will then be the same Brexit transition period until the 31st of December 2020. And again, our free movement rights as British people continue throughout that period. We will then have at least until the end of June 2020 to make the application for status. That will be an awful lot like settled status, but we'll have different titles and different processes in each of the countries. They will need to be UK nationals will need to be in the Europe before the end of that transition period to benefit from this. And again, just like the UK, if they have over 5 years residence, they will qualify for permanent residence equivalent. If not, they will qualify for a temporary residence with the right to move into permanent residence at the 5-year point. Family members will also be protected. We use the word harmonisation here because there will be a toolkit or a manual published by the European Union that will set out how this should work across those 31 different countries. But really importantly, it will nevertheless be different. The systems will differ, the processes will differ. If you have British people in more than one European country, you need to be ready for them to experience slightly different processes and be alive to those differences. So try and get advice on that early. British people in Ireland will not need to make an application, just as Irish people in the UK won't need to make an application. But again, their family members will do. And the Irish government haven't published how this will work. But it may be, again, that it's worth a British person making an application to make it easier for their family members.
So that's if the family members are from non-EU, non-UK, so yeah. American, whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. That's right. If there is no deal, it becomes more complicated. Again, we'll leave at midnight on the 30th of March. But we will lose our free movement rights immediately as UK citizens. So what that will mean is, it will mean two things. You're going to have a population of British people dotted, or you may have a population of British people dotted around Europe. They are going to have lost their free movement rights, so they're going to need to confirm that they were living in any given member state before Brexit, and that they continue to have the right to stay there. Belgium, as I've said, will allow 21 months for that application to go through. The Dutch will allow, I think it's 15 or 18 months for the application to go through, because that's how long they think it will take. The Germans are not very sympathetic and will allow 3 months for it to go through. The French, not very certain, and they'll allow 3 or 12 months. They haven't quite decided. You're going to need to know what the rules are, what people can apply for, what they qualify for in Europe, and how long they've got. You're going to need to know who your British people are, who need to make the application. You're going to need to see that that happens. So the first thing is, if you don't know your numbers, try and work out who they are. Most of our clients, pardon me, most of our clients are running voluntary surveys or asking people to update their HR records. That's a good system, but it's subject to human error, and it's subject to people actually doing it. And I know that my address and work day at work is probably 3 addresses before the one that I live in now. You're going to need to make sure that you're monitoring that and actually really reinforcing the importance of giving you this information if you don't know who these impacted people are. You're then going to need to make sure that they fully understand what that they need to do and that they do it. So we're already running assessments for some of our clients. You're also going to have a population of people who aren't there at the moment, but are going to need to get to British people are going to need to go into Europe to work. This is slightly grey. You're going to have within that, some of those people are going to be going on business. They're going to be going as business visitors, and every indication is that they'll be able to just travel in and they won't need to worry about a visa or a work permit. Some of them will be going to work, and it will be really clear that they're going to work. If I was going to go and work as a consultant in our Frankfurt practice, really cut and dry that I'm working. But if it's short periods where they would in the past have just gone in and done things and not thought about it, in future you're going to have to be certain that just as you would for an American going into Holland, you're going to need to make sure that the tasks that they are doing are permitted as business visitors. And there was a story in, I think it was the Times this morning, that European border officers are waiting to start really questioning British people to make sure that they are engaging in permitted activities. Those activities are different across all of those countries. We know that meetings are okay. We know that negotiating a contract should be okay. Beyond that, a little bit more complicated. Even training, whether or not you're allowed to train people, can differ from country to country.
So if you have a UK citizen in your workforce who's going into Europe to implement a project, a software project,
yeah,
would that be permitted, or we don't know yet?
It will differ from country to country.
Okay.
Yeah, and please don't ask me to go through the 31 countries. So start to think about what your people do and whether or not that will be allowed. Then, as I said, people who are definitely going into work, and those people are going for a short period and it turns out they are considered to be working, they're going to need a work permit. So a work permit to get into the Netherlands, I've been told I shouldn't call the Netherlands Holland, typically looking, including getting the application together at the moment, about 2 months. For Italy, you're looking at about 6 months, but it can take longer. That might take longer again after Brexit if there's no deal and there are queues outside the embassies for the European countries and they aren't quite geared up to deal with the extra number of applications coming from the UK. So look at your people, work out, will they qualify? What's involved in their qualification for a visa? Do you need to pay them more money than you have been? Do you need to make sure they have company experience? Do you need to make sure that they are working in a sufficiently skilled job? Having done that, look at how long it will take and how soon they need to be there. And it might be that some moves need to come forwards before Brexit. It might be that some moves need to be delayed. Some might be okay. In some circumstances, it's conceivable that you say, actually, we need Brian, who's Scottish, to be in Italy in June. That's just not going to happen. You might need to look at having somebody else go and do that job, a European who has free movement rights. So for no deal, this is serious stuff. This is what we're saying. Always for all of this, you need to know who your people are, but that's particularly important knowing who your British people in Europe are for a no deal. It's particularly important that you know which British people are going into Europe in the next year or so, and could be stopped as a consequence of no deal, that your recruiters know, that your business managers know, and that for these two cohorts you're assessing now what's involved and whether or not they're going to be able to get there on time. I'm always, what I don't never want to be is that ambulance chasing law firm partner who's trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. That this is a serious issue and it could really disrupt your business. So please take it with that level of seriousness.
So maybe before we just move into kind of preparing your business, there's a lot there for people to absorb, and people might want to ping in a few questions. But before we move into the specifics of the business, if we look at the UK as a whole, and most of our companies are looking at the UK as an export market, let's say, what sectors do you think will be impacted most by this in the UK?
So the sectors being impacted most by this, if they're for people coming into the UK and people already operating, where you find that you bring high churn of people to the UK for short periods of time, that's going to get more complicated. If there is no deal, then it will be a slightly more uncertain at the border, and what you're going to find is that there will be no certainty that they will be able to stay beyond the 3 years. Ultimately, that's probably manageable for the first period until we get to 2021, when the new immigration system is coming in. But where you have a churn of people, you're going to need to make sure that when they come in, they make their applications, their entitlements are confirmed, and that they're there.
So are they the kind of sectors like construction, hospitality, in terms of the UK, and how UK business might be disrupted?
Yeah, they are. And the other risk for sectors such as hospitality, for construction, for sectors where your people don't tend to spend much time at a computer at a desk, the other risk for you is that this all passes them by. They might see an advert on Facebook that the Home Office are about to run a campaign on that. They may see something in the newspaper, but this could pass them by. And if you will have to work that little bit harder, it'll be harder to email them to say, please can you make sure that you're doing this? You'll need to make sure that they can access information that shows them what they need to do, that reassures them, but also impresses on them the importance of doing this and getting it right. It's those workforces that work out on site, on the shop floor. Retail is another one, to make sure that people understand their entitlements, but also understand their obligations is probably too strong a word, but it goes to the right place.
So I suppose one of the areas, as the UK evolves and changes, and as employment becomes more complex, I suppose there is potentially opportunity also for companies though who are making improving automation, helping companies overcome some of these issues where they needed a workforce, and helping them where they're tighter and squeezed in their workforce, make their processes more efficient.
Yeah, and I think there are opportunities so on the automation point. So from the beginning of 2021, we'll have an entirely new immigration system for the UK. Detail will come later, but essentially, if you want to bring in somebody to work in a lower skilled job from anywhere in the world, they're going to be limited to 1 year or 2 years if they are aged 18 to 30 and from a developed nation. What that means is it's going to be a lot harder to fill lower skilled vacancies than it has been. So in practice, if you're working in automation, if you're working on increasing productivity by reducing the need for manual labour and people, there are opportunities over the next year and a half, 2 years, year and a half, I suppose it is. It's really not that long to begin to think about the sectors. Construction will be an example, care would be an example, retail and hospitality we've come to, that we have a high reliance on lower skilled labour, and thinking about how you can help them increase their productivity. There's also opportunities in the market for companies in recruitment, in my opinion, because this is an uncertain time. It's harder. The labour market is tightening. European people are less inclined to come to the UK and are coming in lower numbers than they have been. There are opportunities to steal a march on your competitors by doing a better job of reassuring European people in the short term that they want to, that it's safe for them to come over here, and that there are options for them to stay for an extended period. We work with recruitment companies, and what we do is we provide guides, we provide videos, we provide simple information that's easily absorbable and easily relayed by busy recruitment people who want to reassure nervous people.
Okay, and again, just my last question before we move into preparing your business, and that is really critical. What about, you mentioned a few times, low-skilled workers.
Yeah.
And I remember within our team, some people in consternation said, do you mean a person with a marketing degree is not a high-skilled person? But it is actually like that, isn't it? I mean, it's quite a high bar.
So at the moment, actually, HR staff and many marketing staff wouldn't qualify. They are lowering that so that it will become, they announced in December that would be lowered, so it will become easier for people in more junior marketing and HR jobs to come in. But even so, you've got co-workers who will struggle. Retail staff will struggle. The people who serve me coffee, waiters, many chefs will struggle as well. Construction workers will struggle, and people working in more manual roles will struggle, because the system is geared around academic qualifications rather than technical qualifications. There are lots of conversations to be had with the government about whether or not these jobs should be considered skills. Something that worries me, and this isn't a moot point at the moment, it's not undecided, so please don't panic, but the people who direct flights in and out of airports are not necessarily considered sufficiently skilled to qualify for work permits. Air traffic controllers. That's a worry to me on lots of levels. Presumably we will still need them after Brexit, so I really just hope that we can find them in the UK.
Okay. Good. I should let you move on. I'm conscious about 10 minutes left that we promised people.
So I'll move quickly through here. This isn't the slide that we will take away. I'll knock up a short note actually on what you can be doing now, so that you've got a written record of what you can do for no deal planning in Europe as well. Essentially though, for now, the simplest thing is plan communications, be ready to talk to people. So now tell people, and we have really good templates. They always need changing to add a degree of emotional intelligence depending on the employer. But tell people, we know this is uncertain, but you can stay. Run webinars, run town hall meetings, make FAQs and guides, posters and videos available to people, but get messages out saying you will be able to stay, but please don't panic, you'll stay, but make sure you do something. This isn't even a cynical marketing pitch. If you Google Home Office Brexit Toolkit, the Home Office have made really good stuff that you can use to actually communicate with your people really, really cleverly. They even put together a slide pack that you can use to run your own town hall sessions for your people.
So it's really about just valuing your workforce and understanding that they may be uncertain. They mightn't be communicating it to you, but they're uncertain. Even if they're in Ireland, UK citizens, people with family members that are from third countries, etc.
And if we and get in touch with us, because we have a simple slip sheet on Ireland that we can share with you as well. And then do that now. But then when Brexit happens, tell them again, big change now. But remember, we care about you, and here is where you can find the information we talked about before. When you come to the end of January, beginning of January 2021, when free movement is about to end, again, talk to people and say, concerning, but you'll be okay. When you're approaching the deadline for your applications, again, communicate and say, have you made your applications? You really should. And this is as true for European people in the UK as it is for British people in Europe. That may need to come forward if there's no deal. You'll need to assume that the deadline for applying is different in every single different country, but just communicate. And of course, the closer you get to that deadline, the stronger your tone will become in terms of directing people. Preparing for a no deal, I've included a link at the bottom of the slide there. Take a look at that link. That takes you to the latest situation for every country in Europe and for the UK, and what needs to happen and how long you've got to get it. Build your plan up from there. We're building plans for companies with lots and lots of people in lots of countries. We've got huge plans. we've got huge plans, but it can be simpler. So that, just to finish off, we've had some really good questions coming up, by the way, so I'm trying to make questions time available for that.
Yeah.
Just to finish off, a new immigration regime for the UK. So at the moment, we're in a situation where European people have freedom of movement. Brexit is happening in part, if you believe the polling, because the British public don't particularly like freedom of movement, and they want controls on migration. And the Prime Minister, at the top of her brief for negotiating Brexit has been to remove free movement. Could change depending on where we end up, but that's the working assumption. And the Home Office is ready to start consulting in detail and then implement a new immigration system. And so what will happen is we will have a single system for everybody who is neither British nor Irish. It will be very similar but easier than the current non-European immigration system. What that will mean in practice is that if you want to recruit a non-European or a European from the 1st of January 2021, they will need to come in through this system. It will be quicker than the current non-EU system. So if you're familiar with Tier 2, you will not need to advertise jobs. There will be no resident labour market test, which was actually one of my policies when I was in the Home Office. They're getting rid of that, so that saves a month. So if you're worried about time delay there, that will go. Nor will there be a cap on the number of workers to come in. Another of my policies when I was in the Home Office, they're removing that, so that will save you another 2 months. Ultimately, whereas now, if you're nervous about this because you're used to waiting between 3 and 6 months to bring in a non-EU worker through Tier 2 General, the Home Office is saying that they think they can get it to 3 weeks, maybe quicker to bring people in. So there will be friction. You'll have to wait for 3 weeks that you didn't have to wait for a European person before the new system, but it will be an awful lot quicker for non-Europeans. But it will be more, it won't be perfect. Firstly, at the moment they're saying that the minimum salary for bringing a worker in will be £30,000 if they're in a skilled role. £30,000 is something that they're going to consult on. We think it's a very high salary. Even London organisations are saying that it should be closer to £20,000. Outside of London, we hear arguments that it should be lower again. The Home Office are going to consult on this. Use your local MP in the UK. Use your trade associations. Write in if they do consult. If you think that that's too high and it will damage your business, make sure that your voice is heard. They're also talking about skill being at A-level level, and again that will cut out huge swaths of technical jobs in retail, hospitality, and the care sector. Some jobs in engineering. Apprentices will rarely qualify because they tend to be at GCSE level for Home Office purposes. Again, make your voice heard on that, but also be planning for what that could mean. Look at your workforce and ask yourself, where we have a high proportion of Europeans, is that because we can't get the skills or the labour locally, or is it just a coincidence? If it isn't a coincidence, think about what that means and think about what these restrictions mean for your business and begin to make assessments as to what you will need to do. Maybe you need to change the way that you recruit. Maybe again you need to hope that you can argue successfully with the Home Office. Maybe you need to automate. Maybe for some of my clients, what we're sensing, it's hard to pin it down, but what we're sensing is that work is going overseas that would have come here if not for the disruption, and the risk is that there's more of that. But low-skilled workers won't be excluded altogether. They will be able to come in for a low-skilled visa category. The Home Office is saying that that will be for people from specific nations, and we expect that to be, in broad terms, developed nations, so Australia, Canada, Japan, South Korea, and also for European nations. There will also be a youth mobility category, most likely, again, for those developed nations, for people coming in for up to 2 years where they're aged 18 to 30. Again, there you're looking at those lower skilled jobs and those jobs where you don't pay 30 grand. Is it enough to have them for a year? Is it enough to have them for 2 years if they're under 30? At what point does age become an issue? Maybe you have people working on particular projects where the skills that ceased to be needed 5 years ago are needed again now. We see this in the nuclear industry. at what point will that be a problem because you won't be able to get the labouring skills that you need. Ultimately, though, I don't want this to be a scare story. Ultimately, the system will be better than what we have for non-Europeans at the moment, but there could be impacts on your business. It needs to be taken. It's worth taking a look at that. So I'm going to leave it there. I covered so much ground there, but it's been 45 minutes, which is a lot of your time. Should we take a few questions?
I think let's pop up some of the questions that came in. So this is from Kevin Buckley. Hard to see how training would not be considered the provision of a service and therefore working. You could not do that when going to the USA from Ireland, for instance. So that's picking up on your point.
Yeah, and there are instances in UK law where you are allowed to train both your own employees and clients, but even then it's restricted, often just in terms of the nature of the contract that you have between you and the persons that are buying the service.
So if we go up to the previous question, how do you handle, sorry, the screen is moving, how do you handle European non-Irish staff who will be periodically going to the UK for a few weeks' work? How will they be affected by a deal or no deal? Thanks.
So a really good question. That was the one actually that made me pause and say how good the questions were. So for Europeans, if there is a deal, my advice is that they firstly look at how often they are coming to the UK for work and how much time they spend. If you think that they will be spending more than the 6 months in the UK each year and needed to qualify for settled status, get pre-settled status early, and then ultimately they'll be able to settle. Where they are not, there is a decision call to be made on whether or not to get them pre-settled status, knowing that ultimately they won't qualify for settled status. But the question is, if you were to do that, what the settled status permission, pre-settled status expires because they won't be able to renew it? We don't have the answer to that. The Home Office have said that they will create a frontier worker visa, but they haven't yet, and they don't know how that will work. If there is no deal, then I talked about how people entering after a no deal will be stamped in for 3 weeks at a time. What we've been told, and this isn't law yet, we haven't seen law, so please, you can't rely on this just yet, but what we've been told is that you will be able to come and go as many times as you want for a 3-week period, and the clock will start again every time you enter. So it should be fine for those people. But again, you can never rely on something that you've been told before it's law, especially when someone else has been told it and they're telling you on a webinar. You have to keep an eye on that in terms of policy.
I'm not sure if we dealt with this issue of posted workers, those who who are paid from a different country, i.e. there's no HMRC record. So this was based on how people record themselves for settled status.
So if we posted workers, if I could, I'm going to dodge the specific rules around posted workers because they're not too similar, especially in terms especially in terms of no deal. But the essential question is, leaving aside the posted workers directive, what if I am on assignment, if I'm posted from France, my contract is set up in France, and I've got no HMRC, I've got no British footprint, frankly. In that instance, you will simply need for that person to be able to demonstrate that they are in the country, and the easiest way to do that is probably an employer letter that when they can use the app, they fill in the form, they probably don't have a national insurance number, they click through and the system says, we've got no record of you. You then click, I would like to provide extra evidence, and it's at that point that I'm showing you how to photo with my phone, but you photo the letter and that gets submitted. If the Home Office have any problems, they will write out to you and they've committed to, they will contact you. They've committed to contacting people at least 3 times and at least 2 ways if they need more information.
Okay. I think we've got through most of the questions. Somebody asking, are we sharing slides? They will be going up on the website and with a copy of this webinar. Questioning about how the common travel area rules apply or not in the event of no deal. So they apply?
Yeah, they do. And the next question actually says UK citizens living in Northern Ireland but working in Republic of Ireland, any impact? No, because they would be fine. where there would be an impact is if you've got a UK national living in Germany and working in Switzerland, or worse, more complicated, because you'll never find out if they live in Germany but their kids go to school in Switzerland. For a deal, arrangements will be in place for those frontier workers. It's less clear what it will mean for students, but there will be arrangements. If there is no deal, it's really not clear what will be in place for frontier workers. We would assume that they need some sort of work permit to be able to move and work across and live across those borders, but it's not quite known yet.
Last question there from our Brexit unit manager. Do the changes also apply to the makeup directors of UK-based companies?
Not that I'm aware of, but it's one that's worth
keeping an eye on.
Yeah.
So we're reaching the end of the webinar. If there was one piece of advice you'd give to companies, I've kind of put it in my head for what I think it is. You can tell me if it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
The first is actually understand your workforce.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Understand what country they're from, their family members, how long they've been living. And then I think the second thing I'd be telling them is listen to this webinar again.
Yeah.
And then they still might have some questions. But what do you think is the most important thing for people to do?
So mine is that my first piece of advice feels a bit abstract, but I think it's important. I hate getting this advice, professional advice, if someone gives it to me. But don't feel like this is too complicated or too uncertain to be able to do anything, because it is easy to put a plan together. The plan might be complicated, but it's easy to put a plan together. And that is, I will firstly work out who my people are. I will secondly communicate with them and make sure that they understand, deal or no deal, what's in place. You'll need some help, but there are free resources for the UK, and there will be free resources for different member states if you aren't in a position to get professional advice. Having communicated with them, I would then, the next step I would make would be to, having understood who those people are, and in particular the British people in Europe, I would begin to assess what they're going to need to do, deal or no deal, so you're on the front foot. If you've not got many people, it shouldn't be too difficult, and it will be worthwhile. If you've got lots of people, it will be difficult, but it's going to be a hell of a lot easier if you've started doing it now, rather than if there is a no deal and things start falling apart. So
final thought, just listening to the complexity for other European countries, I think we're in a very particularly advantaged situation having the common travel area, which is some of our clients have already told us is they're looking at it as a source of competitive advantage and a unique selling point for doing business in the UK. Everyone looking for the silver lining, I think, in that Brexit cloud. Very finally, for everybody listening in, just want to draw your attention once again to Brexit supports that are available across the state. I'm going to speak specifically just to the Enterprise Ireland supports. So there is an Act On initiative. They are free consultancy at the moment, structured around customs, financial implications and sourcing. We might have a need for movement of people. We can look at that. There is a Be Prepared grant, which in any case people could use, which if they have specific questions around movement of people, they can get in touch with their Enterprise Ireland contact. The advisory clinics are still on the go. Go to the bepreparedwebsite.com and you can see under events there, that's where you'll find the download for this. And there are very excellent Customs Insight course available. We have, of course, our office here in the UK, and we are ready, willing and able to talk to every client that has questions around Brexit or around the marketplace. And of course, there are other supports with our partner agencies like the Enterprise Ireland. We're getting a few thank yous. That's good, Ian.
Yeah, that's why I'm smiling. That's really kind of you. Thank you for doing that. Yeah.
So thanks, everybody. And onwards and upwards.
Yeah, very best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.